Alright guys, welcome back to Hildebrand Outdoors. Today we're going to be talking about milling a pine log specifically for beginners. And we're going to cut this pine log up as we talk about it. But if you got some pine logs in a sawmill and you're thinking about milling it into lumber, then this video is one you want to watch. But we're going to cover some basic techniques, tips, and things to watch for as we watch this video on the computer. We'll be talking about some different techniques, so keep watching and you'll learn. If you're new to sawing, you'll learn some things, and if you'll leave some comments, you might teach me some things as well. But the main thing on your homestead is you want to be able to turn logs into usable lumber. So the first step in milling a log is preparation. You want to start by selecting a log that has minimal knots. Knots are a pain, and you can see this log on the sawmill is pretty clean, pretty straight. But knots make it bad when you start trying to work with it in wood. Knots tear out. So you want to try to make sure there's minimal knots. There's no way to get rid of all the knots, but you want to make sure there's minimal knots. You want to try to debark the tree if you can. This one is not debarked, but I have a debarker on the sawmill, so I don't really need it to be debarked. But if you don't have a debarker on your sawmill, you need to try to get it. You need to try to debark it. You also want, if it's a yard tree especially, you want to make sure there's no nails or wires in it or metal. You should be surprised how often you find metal in these trees, and it can wreck a blade. I mean, once you hit metal, you're done. So that's $45 wasted, or $30, whatever, how much your blade costs. But so you want to make sure that there's no nails in the tree that you're cutting. So I would steer clear of yard trees, because a lot of times those have nails in them, and you're going to hit it. So, and then that's going to ruin your blade. I had a tree that I cut a few years ago that had a nail in it that I remember it was from a deer stand that we had when I was a child, and that tree caused me some trouble. It would cost me a blade. So I wasn't sure what tree it was, and you know, it was just in the woods, but it actually cost me $45 for that old tree stand that was in that tree. But next thing you want to do is make sure you got a good setup for your sawmill. You want to make sure your mill is on level ground, because even if it's just a slight unevenness, it can cause some inconsistency, depending on your sawmill, of course. But you want to check your blade, make sure it's tight, the tension's tight, make sure that the blade is sharp. You'll be able to see that as you cut. But you know, when you hit a knot in that pine, this is pine here, when you hit a knot, that blade can dip on you. But a dull blade is going to dip a lot more. So the tension and alignment of the blade is crucial too. So you want that blade to be lined up. If it's off a little bit, it's going to cause some miscuts. So you want it to be lined up. The next thing you need to think about is the position of your log on the sawmill. So, you know, if you got a log that's a little bowed, then you're going to want to put that bow up. I always put it on top. I put the bow up top so that it's rounded this way, and I'm just cutting the top off of it, getting a flat edge. So when you position the log, make sure you position it in a way that you're going to get the most out of your wood. So if you got a tapered log, then you're going to raise the front up a little bit if you've got something to raise it with. On mine, I have a way I can raise it so that you're cutting evenly. So you want the taper to be the center of the log on this side, and the center of the log on this side should be equal distance from the ground. So then you're cutting equal amount off. Now sometimes when I get in a hurry, I don't worry about all that, but that is something, if you want to get the most out of your lumber, that you want to do that. But you know, for beginners, you may want to draw on the log and things like that. But I don't do that, but that's something you may want to do if you're a beginner. And if you got a sawmill that's more manual, you want to make sure you get the most out of your lumber, because if you don't, then you're going to be wasting your wood. But now the first cut and the first few cuts are actually going to be what they call slab cutting. You're going to be cutting slabs off, and everybody knows what slabs look like, but you got to get the bark off. Then you can reuse those pieces later and put them back on the sawmill, but you're trying to square out, you're trying to box out the log to get it square on all four sides. So you're going to remove all the outer portion, and then when you get through with that, you're going to have a square, basically a timber, whether it's 8 by 8, 10 by 10, whatever you can get out of it, that's what you'll have. And then you can start cutting your boards. So once you square out a log, and it depends on what size you're cutting, but you want you want to then square out the cant. So you want to go up to the pith of the log, which is the very center. You go up to, I usually go about 1 inch away, and then I flip my log so that I'm not cutting the center. The weakest part of the log is in that center, and you don't want that in the middle because it makes boards bow, especially on hardwood. Pine not as bad, but still you don't want to do that even on pine either. But like so once you get that square, you can start milling boards, and that's when you start, I call it making money, because you're going through slab after slab after slab, and you don't have to worry about flipping it until you get to the pith. So the milling boards would be the next step, and that's when you're just cutting, and you're gonna cut inch thick, 2 inch thick, whatever you want on that is what you'll cut. But then you got to come up with a way to dry your lumber. Most people are going to air dry it, and that'll be fine for what you're going to use it for. If you want to kiln dry it, you may have to get somebody to do that, or either build a solar kiln. But basically, these are just the basics of cutting lumber as a beginner. Now, one thing you might want to, some common mistakes. So some common mistakes that people might make, and we'll go over that, is one thing they might do is they cut too thin. You cut a board too thin. I mean, I usually try to go to 1 inch, but I'll give you an example. A guy ordered some material to make pallets for me one time, and I charged him by the board foot, and he wanted his boards to be, I think it was 5/8 of an inch. And it took me forever to cut that guy's lumber. So when you're pricing, if somebody wants thin lumber, you charge them for 1 inch, because it takes the same amount of time to cut a 5/8 inch board as it does to cut an inch board. So don't charge them based on 5/8. You charge them based on 1 inch. That's one mistake that I made at first. And thin boards, if they're too wide, they're going to cup and bow a pretty good bit. So the thicker the board, the less they're going to cup and bow. That's another mistake that I made at first, and people can make. Another thing with pine is you want to keep your sawmill clean, because that tar and that pine tar can get on your blades, and it gumps up everything. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your sawmill clean. And in mine, I have a watering system where I can put Dawn dish detergent and pine salt in it to keep it clean, but it still doesn't always keep it clean. So every now and then you may want to run diesel through your, not a whole tank of diesel, but just a little bit of diesel through your watering system, and that'll clean everything out. So these are just a few tips for beginners on sawing up pine on the sawmill.